Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. I have a blanket on my head, so we'll see. Hey friendles, I'm Kendall, and I could probably go on an hours-long rant about how Western media has a fear of femininity, but I don't think many of y'all are ready to have that conversation yet. Anyways, since you're watching this video, as you can see, the peach doll is finally finished. After months of not really putting it off, I just had a lot of other stuff I had to get to. So, I'll start from the beginning. Back in March, Princess Peach Showtime was just about to come out, and I was at a Daiso one day, and all the pretty, sparkly things had me going. I'm gonna go make a Princess Peach Showtime doll. I'm gonna make her multiple brand new outfits, and I'm gonna make it look like she belongs in Showtime. Anyways, we gotta start scanning before I develop a sense of self-control.
Right.
As you can see, I was thinking a little too ambitiously at the time, and now I have a bunch of trinkets I don't entirely have a use for. Knowing myself, I do tend to get inspired by little trinkets, so I imagine I'll use them eventually. During this ambitious drive, I started drawing 2 concepts for 2 new costumes, a clown and a unicorn. Look, I don't know how obvious it is in this video, but I was extremely anxious when I was drawing this, and my lines are very unconfident. You know, I'm not sure how I got through the entirety of this drawing being so anxious. For all the colors, I just color picked them from a picture of all the trinkets I bought, and these were the end result. Did I do anything with these designs? Nah. After that, I began drawing an orthographic image of Princess Peach, just drawing the front and the side view, trying to make the drawing as accurate as possible to the character, and believe me, that is not fun when you're anxious. While drawing, I also kept in mind how I wanted the joints to look, and also kept in mind how I wanted them to move. The goal with each new doll is to improve upon the last one. Wow, that was generic. Using a separate color, I draw out some interior forms that are just going to serve as a visual reference for some joints and some mechanisms. It'll help me keep in mind a bunch of things while I'm jointing the doll. Once that was done, I set the orthographic image as my reference in ZBrush, set a large rectangle at the same height that I want my doll to be, and then I start the blockout phase. The blockout phase is the point in a sculpt where the general silhouette of the sculpt is made with simple shapes that are pushed and pulled in specific positions. Considering how detailed dolls can be, this is certainly the fastest part of the process. Once the blockout phase is finished, I merge together relevant parts. So for example, I will merge together the head parts so that they're one big head part, or I might merge together the torso pieces so they make one big torso. I generally like to keep the sculpt as multiple separate large pieces as it makes jointing easier down the line, and it kind of helps with going from large details to small details as I continue sculpting. This is just my workflow. Somebody else might have a different one, especially if they model for video games or something. But in this instance, I'm modeling for toys. After detailing the torso and the face, I go and detail the arms and legs. And I also add some rudimentary joints, but as you'll see, the hands are usually saved for last because I just find it easier to work on those as I'm adding their jointed parts to the wrist. But also, I've just never been very good with hands, and I really like the way I block these ones out. And yeah, it's easier for me to do at the end. Let me just make my life easier for myself, okay? While I added some spheres for the eyes, I decided to give making molded eyelashes a try. I made the general shape of the eyelashes by using the extract function in ZBrush, and while I did like the result that I got, we're gonna come back to this later. And I'm not just saying that and forgetting, I genuinely mean we're gonna come back to this later because it's relevant to how I did the face up. In preparation for jointing the arms and legs, I took a cylinder and I used the... Okay, this is not the time for me to be forgetting the name of the tool, but the gist of what I did was I masked out these points in ZBrush. The tool is called the Z-Modeler tool, that's what it's called. And I used the Z-Modeler tool to move around some things, and I got the shape of a heart because I thought it would look nice. Once I was satisfied with the shape of the heart, I put it on the knees and the elbows because I wanted to try some kneecaps and elbow caps that looked pretty. And then my ZBrush crashed and I completely stopped working on this project until July. I came back to this project in July. What? Okay. I came back to this project in July after doing freelance work for a couple months. And I started by going back and detailing some things. In this instance, I detailed the ears, but I also took a stab at doing the eyelashes again. I said earlier we'd get back to the eyelashes, and that's because I was pretty on the fence about them the whole time. In this iteration, I extracted the lash line, and then I extracted the eyelashes themselves. But part of me was still unsure if I wanted to do sculpted eyelashes on this doll. But here's how I ended up deciding. So I was in a stream chat of the YouTuber Moon Bunnies, and I asked the stream, should I do sculpted lashes or should I do drawn lashes on the face up? And pretty much everybody in the stream chat said do sculpted lashes, but my instinct said I should draw them on, so I followed my instincts and just decided to do drawn lashes. You'll see that soon. Making the glove cuff was actually very similar to making the heart kneecaps. So what I did for that was I took a cylinder that was like really low poly, and then I masked out different points on the cylinder and just maneuvered them until I got a shape that looked roughly like the cuff at the end of her gloves. You'll see if I ended up using that. The shoulder ball was a pretty similar process too, and considering that this shape was going to be very universal, all I needed to do was mask out the center of the cylinder and then use the Z-Modeler tool to extract the part that I had masked into a new poly group. And then I extracted it, but I extracted it inward so that it basically made the peg in the middle of the shoulder joint. And that's how I got the simple shoulder joint. I know some people might think it looks kind of big, but that was the simplest solution I could think of to make a joint that could like sort of slouch, but also be able to change the arms if I wanted to have bare arms versus the gloved arms. Look, my videos are not tutorials, okay? You're here to watch me suffer. I learned how to make the shoes from a video that's here on YouTube actually, that was made by one of my former professors from art school named Elaine Days. I'll link to his video in the description, but Elaine, if you happen to be watching this, I would suggest doing a voiceover and scripting your videos because it would be a lot easier for a novice sculptor to follow the instruction. I was able to get the gist of your instructions, but you kind of did go back and forth a lot in your way of giving the tutorial. But anyway, I'll explain the process for you real quick. To make the shoe, you just mask out the shape of the shoe on the foot, you extract the mask, and then in the deformation menu, you click Smooth by Polygroup, and then ZBrush crashed again. But if you do what I said successfully, you'll have a shoe. So yeah, that was frustrating, and compounded by the fact that it was summer and ZBrush crashes in the heat, and where I live, it is hot most of the year. Yeah, that was frustrating. And this was also while we were still in July. I went on to work on some other stuff after that. By the time I remembered I had this ZBrush project in my computer, it was August. Coming back to this file after a couple of months, I started bullioning holes in the arms and legs to make room for the joints. I also bullioned a hole for the heart, since, the heart is a knee and elbow cap. Something I've been trying to do differently when making dolls is making sure that the weight of the doll is properly distributed for better posing, and that is particularly relevant for the Peach doll here. In relation to weight distribution of the torso especially, I bullioned some holes at the hips and the shoulder, and then I reorganized the polygroup so that the polygroup of the torso is one polygroup and that the coverings of the shoulder and the hips were separate polygroups. I took the hip and shoulder coverings and just deleted them outright, and then I took the Z-Modeler tool, set it to extract, and then I extracted the polygroup mesh inward, and I ended up getting a neat inner shell on the inside of the torso. Using the Sculptress tool, I used that to basically dissolve some inner parts of the shell so that the polygons are not crossing into each other, and that can really cause a lot of problems with printing. But when that was taken care of, I took another sphere and I used that to divide the torso into two pieces, so now I can have a torso with a swiveling top. I move around some inner meshes of the torso because I do want to make sure that the torso has enough weight to stand up, but I don't want it to be too heavy that it's not going to allow the doll to stand at all, and that was a pretty big problem with the Sunny doll that I made for Callan. A lot of what I've put into the Peach doll is actually based around a lot of what I talked with Callan about after that whole endeavor with their doll was said and done. Man, I'm feeling tired from eating all that cheese. To bullion slits in the elbows and knees, I took a rectangle, and using the Z-Modeler tool, I did some extrusion magic, so that way I could hollow out the joint while also giving it a proper slit. And doing it this way is far easier than the previous ways I had done it, because the previous ways I had done it was like using multiple rectangles and it was this whole big mess. I'm actually very proud of a lot of what I've accomplished with the Peach doll, because I think I've learned probably the most with this doll out of any of the ones I've made so far. As you're watching this footage, you might be wondering how I got the heart cap onto the knees and the elbows, and I'm gonna be honest, I don't remember. Sorry. Making the crown was pretty simple. You just take a cylinder, then you take a ring around that cylinder, and then you extract it so that the crown has a base, and then using the masking tool, you mask out some points, and then you just move those points until they're all nice and spiky. And then you just scale up a few things outwards so that they look kind of like they have the crown's usual bevel. And look at that, you've got a crown. You guys seriously have no idea how proud I am with the faceplate system that I made for this doll. I managed to make a system that doesn't require magnets and can just easily slip on and off. Oh, you guys have no idea how proud I am of this. But here's the issue when it comes to the footage. I, for the life of me, could not even fathom how to explain this process. It was such an experiment, but I am so happy with how it worked out. And as it stands in my past videos, I usually don't explain the head jointing process because it's so complicated and it hurts my head just thinking about it. So, I'm gonna speed through this footage. And if by some miracle one day I get this process down to a concise science, maybe I'll make a tutorial. But I don't think I can do that right now because the process for me has always just been experimenting and praying that it works. But yes, I'm really proud of how this came out. I'm so happy. The way I've hollowed out the legs here is relevant to what I said earlier about maintaining weight in specific parts of the doll. So I used a duplicate of the original leg sculpturings and I shrunk it somewhat and used that to hollow out the legs. I wanted to make sure that the legs had a sufficient amount of weight so that she could potentially stand on her own even though her feet are so tiny. And I also did a similar process to the arms because I wanted to make sure that her arms could properly pose. Posability in doll sculpting is one of those things that seems deceptively simple, but nah, it's actually quite difficult. And I will forever respect people who work in big companies and do the engineering behind not just dolls, but toys in general. I want to learn from y'all. Y'all are amazing! Usually when I boolean holes in the feet and in the wrist joints, the hole itself doesn't survive the printing process, but color me surprised, it actually survived the printing process this time and made adding wires into those holes a lot easier. It's probably because I made sure that the cylinder boolean was 1 millimeter thick, and my wire is also 1 millimeter thick, so hey, it all worked out. Y'all have no idea how proud I am of these hands. And they were done really simply as well. So I just took some sausages and molded them into the shapes of fingers. And usually making pretty hands does not go this easily for me. But with some simple shapes, I made some very elegant hands. Like I said earlier, I like to save this part for the end, so I merged all the hand pieces together. And then I added details to the hands, smoothed out all the rough edges, and just made them look more like actual hands. And oh my Lanta, I'm just so happy with how they came out. Nearing the end of the sculpt, I take the sculptress tool and I smooth down all of the hard edges that appear on any part of the sculpt. So basically, any edge that looks like it can become really sharp at that small scale, I smooth it down with a sculptress brush, and I try to smooth it down more than I think it needs to be smoothed, because these edges are always going to print out a lot sharper than you would imagine. As you can imagine, this process gets very redundant very quickly. Now that we're pretty close to the finish line, for the sculpt that is, I take the time to write some left and right indicators on different parts of the body. And this is one of the other things I talked to Callan about, where they suggested that I write the left and right indicators on inside parts of the toy. And honestly, that's so much smarter than what I was initially doing, because I was initially writing these left and right indicators on outside parts of the joints, and I considered them hidden because they were on an interior section. So like, imagine that on the legs, I wrote left and right. I wrote left and right near the crotch. And in retrospect, I could have just written it in the joint pocket of the legs. Yeah, you know, the obvious doesn't always occur to me like it should, but still, I do this for every project because it makes the left and right pieces a lot easier to identify. I guess I'm just outing myself as not very smart. After properly sizing all the pieces, I bring them into my printing software and I begin setting them up for printing. It's a pretty mundane process, but the one thing that I will be changing this time around is that I'll be using water washable resin. TM. This has nothing to do with me thinking that one resin is better than the other or anything like that, and has everything to do with the fact that I'm pretty sure I've burned off all presence of my nose hairs because of using all that rubbing alcohol to wash the regular resin prints. So yeah, I made the switch because water washable resin is far easier to clean, and I would like to save my sense of smell, thank you very much. Setting up the resin prints is a pretty mundane process, but I must say I definitely made a pretty crucial error. Not with setting up the prints, but with the specific resin that I bought. This isn't to say water washable resin is bad, if anything I prefer it. But let me show you what happens when you try to cheap out on skin-colored resin. I'm not going to name the brand that I bought of this resin, but as you can see, that color is way off. It's as if they knew I was making a peach doll and decided that peach colorant was the perfect color for the resin I needed. So I ended up looking up this brand, and I saw that batch color inconsistencies for this brand are not abnormal, unfortunately. So I knew I was going to have to buy a different resin brand. But as I was analyzing the prints, I did see that some openings of the joints and the wrist, especially the wrist and the ankle, would probably be a little too small when it comes to practical movement. So I thought that it would be best for me to go back into ZBrush and make a couple adjustments. This process isn't too difficult or anything. I just ended up taking the Move tool and the Z Modeler and the Gizmo tool and just making things slightly bigger at some openings. I wanted to make sure that there was enough weight and enough space for these joints to properly move and properly have the weight that they need to hold a pose. So that's why I went back into ZBrush and took this precaution. After fixing the joints and the openings, I brought the print pieces back into ZBrush, and then I also bought some Lego Mars brand water washable resin in skin tone, which is what I should have done in the first place. Invest in the good stuff, guys. Something I don't have a lot of footage of right now, or any footage really, is the amount of print fails that I had trying to print the skin tone parts. This has nothing to do with the Lego Mars resin I brought after the first failed resin, and for a while I really wasn't sure what was going on. I had assumed, since it was still ridiculously hot outside, that these would print out just fine, but I was wrong. When looking at the prints though, it did look like the prints were printing improperly because of temperature inconsistencies. So, thinking about that, I realized it would probably be in my best interest to invest in one of those little mini heaters that you put in the back of a resin printer. I'll spoil it for you, this was the saving grace I was looking for. But I do have some footage of me fumbling to install it. Enjoy! Alright, how do you install this tripe? Nick? Can you help me? I'm kind of dumb. Nick? With the heater installed, I let it preheat for a bit, and then I started a new print, just internally praying that this print would work out. Yeah, I had a lot of failed prints before this, and while I didn't show it, you're gonna have to take my word for it with how dramatic I'm being, okay? Please? As you can see, God heard my prayers this day because the print actually worked. And look at that, the head mechanism, it almost works, yay! I didn't expect the head faceplate mechanism to be perfect, so of course I did a little sanding. And then it fit together perfectly after that. Look at that, it's amazing! Yeah, I'm really happy about this if you couldn't tell. Before I could string the body together, I had to make sure that the little feet could hook onto the body's elastic. So I took the little feet, made sure that the wire would go through the hole of the little feet, and then took some glue, put that glue on the tip of the wire, and then put that wire through the little feet, and then cut the wire so that it fit the little feet just nicely. And then I did that with the other little feet. So now we have 2 little feet. Once I had all the skin tone body pieces together, I took a rough measurement of the body's length with elastic, and when I thought that that would be a good length, I sewed the loop of elastic together, and then I slowly strung it through the body, starting from the head and then going down to one leg at a time. The way I strung her shoulder bars is a bit complicated to explain, partially because this camera angle does not do that good of a job of showing it, and that's my fault, of course. But what it looks like I did is I sewed a loop outside of the body, put one of the shoulder balls into it, and then pulled it through the body, put the other shoulder ball into the loop, and then using my thread, I sewed that loop closed as tight as I could, and now I have 2 shoulder balls suspended in the torso so that I could use these shoulder balls to swap between plain arms and white gloved arms. Kind of funny that I say that because at this point I hadn't printed the white arm pieces yet. Despite not having any white arm pieces, or any white pieces for that matter, I still kind of wanted to see what she would look like with eyes. Yeah, the pearls are pretty interesting. This might be an interesting concept for a future doll, but look, she bends. It didn't take long for the white pieces to be printed out, thankfully. So now that I have the white arm pieces, all I needed to do was string them all together, and the idea was that these pieces would be individually elasticized, and they would be swappable on the shoulder. Each arm needed 2 S-hooks, one to connect to the wrist and the other to the shoulder. Starting with the wrist, I put the S-hook on the elastic, and then I put that onto the wrist, and then I begin stringing it through the arms until it reaches the point where it would have to connect on the shoulder. At the end of the elastic, I put the other S-hook, and now we have a single replaceable arm. I put the first arm onto the doll, and look at that, it actually looks really nice. It poses nice too. Now I just have to repeat that process for the other arm. Now that we have the strung body, it's time to make the clothes. So this is one of the challenges I set myself up for when it comes to making unique doll bodies with every project, is that new bodies means I need new patterns. I had a good idea for how I wanted to approach the skirt, which was basically me drafting some pieces based on the length of her body and just saying, yep, that'll work. As you can see with me tracing the pattern pieces. Pretty much all of the patterning was done off camera because, to be honest, I'm not sure I wanted to record hours of me getting frustrated and trying again on different pieces of fabric and different attempts of different pattern pieces. It was all just a very frustrating endeavor when it came to making the bodice. But yeah, I did most of that off camera, and another thing I did off camera was actually a lot of the sewing, which is pretty funny because the Cedric robe video that I made involved a lot of sewing. This time around, I just didn't want to move the sewing machine into another room, so I took these pattern pieces and brought them with me into a different room and just put them together there. While I may not have a lot of footage of me actively sewing these pieces together to make the dress, I do have photos that I took along the way of the process, and I guess you can slowly see the dress kind of coming together. Despite the struggle of the bodice pieces, I actually had a pretty decent idea of how I wanted to put them together, and even though it was a lot of pain, hardship, struggle, did I say pain? It actually all ended up working out pretty well. And when it came to the final form of the dress, this is what we ended up with. Anyways, after however long that took, I now have a pretty dress with an open back. The next step in the dressmaking process was to add some pretty embellishing sparkly thingies. Starting with this pretty pink ribbon I gathered it by hand because it wouldn't fit under my sewing machine, to turn it into some pretty trim that I was going to put around the neck of the dress and around the waistline. While sewing on the gathered trim, I painstakingly strung on some beading and sequins because I thought it added a little nice something to the dress. And you know, I kind of find beading and stringing things on kind of therapeutic. Kind of in the way that like knitting can be therapeutic or crocheting. Funny story, crocheting is actually going to come up very soon. After stringing beads and sequins on other parts of the dress, I was getting really into the feeling of just stringing some things. So I started adding some beads around the cuff of the sleeve, and I actually really ended up enjoying this process. And I think that the beading around the sleeves looks very nice. That and the sequins were too big, so they probably would have looked a little busy and a little heavy. So yeah, the beads by themselves looks pretty alright. By that point, I couldn't get enough of beading, so I ended up taking some gold sequins that I have, and I ended up separating out some very specific gold sequins, and I used that to make the base for the gem that would be on her chest. Working carefully, I formed the sequins into an octagon type shape, or whichever shape is the six-sided one, and then I took a string of some limited gold beads that I have, and I added that ring along the sequins, and that's where the bead is going to sit. I went into this dress thinking I'd probably make a blue resin gem that I would put in the middle of the golden emblem holy thingy that's on her dress. But then I looked through my beads and I found these large beads I got from Daiso, and I thought one of the blue ones would look really nice. And it did. I don't know about you guys, but I think the addition of beading and sequins and even this large bead in the middle of her chest, it gives this elegant kind of handmade feel that I really like. And in a way, I can say that despite this being Princess Peach, this is my Princess Peach. So now we're shifting into the part that I've probably dreaded the most, and that's the wig. I'm going to try to go through this part as fast as I can because I attempted this wig about 4 times before I got something right. But I think that this first thing that I did here is actually worth showing. I have no idea how long ago it was when this occurred to me, but I remember thinking that making a wig cap by crocheting it out of yarn or something would probably be an interesting idea. So I decided to try it out for this doll. I crocheted this wig cap, doing a bunch of double crochets while also trying to keep in mind the way that the cap was going to sit on the head and how I wanted it to basically fold around the head. And eventually, I had a large crocheted wig cap. I try it on the doll, and this looks like an oversized yarmulke. Kind of funny looking on a doll scale. I do think that this idea has some potential to make wig caps, but more than likely it's going to be better suited for larger dolls. So for the time being, I ended up unwinding this yarmulke looking wig cap and deciding to make a regular wig cap out of fabric. Okay, I tend to be kind of long-winded, so I'm going to try to get through this whole process of the wig as quickly as I can, and I don't want to go step by step through every single attempt, because like I said, I attempted this about 4 times before I got it right. But the base of all these wigs ended up being a wig cap of some sort. The first one was a sewn wig cap, the next 3 were a fabric and glue wig cap. And I think one of the mistakes that I made was that I either added too much hair, or I wasn't styling it as I was applying the hair, or in retrospect, when I'm looking back at these wigs in the footage, I think I was probably just too picky with what I made, and I was just expecting perfection too soon. And I think that's a problem with a lot of us artists. We expect perfection too soon, and you know, that's pretty unrealistic for someone like me to expect, considering that I've not really made many wigs prior to this. Well, I have in the Waluigi video, and they just didn't look good. But yeah, wigs were a struggle for me. Like I said, in the 4th attempt, I finally got it somewhat right. I did style as I go, but I had a lot of difficulty trying to get the hair peaks to be nice and pokey. In the previous attempts of the wig, I used Vaseline, water, baby oil, a bunch of things to try to get the peaks to be nice and pokey, but I just couldn't get them to have the iconic peach look. So after a while, I thought about it, and then I realized, wait, you can just get the same effect with hair gel. So I told myself I'm gonna go to the store, and I'm gonna buy some hair gel. I went to the store with the intent of finding some travel-sized hair gel or hair mousse or something of the like, and I ended up finding this brand here that I actually find incredibly nostalgic. A lot of you are going to know it under the name brand Gorilla Snot, but from when I was a kid, and from how often I've seen it in Mexico when I was young, I remember it as Moco de Gorilla. I remember it being extremely popular, and I remember seeing it in Mexico first before it came to the US. And funny thing, this actually ended up being cheaper than the bottle of hair mousse that I found in the travel size section. Generally speaking, I'm glad that I bought Moco de Gorilla instead of the other one, because the other brand was endorsed by PETA. And you know, I have a lot that I could say about PETA, okay? Bunch of hypocritical But anyways, after 4 attempts and a bunch of hair gel, I have a wig that I really like, and it's so pretty. Guys, look, I succeeded making a wig. Going back to the dress, I began experimenting with some other embellishments. In my head, I knew that I kind of wanted to do something really pretty and fancy, like the Super Smash Bros. Ultimate renders for Peach's dress. And I kind of had to think pretty hard about how I was going to embellish a lot of these things. Alternating between some beads, some pearls, and all these other little fancy things, I eventually decided that I was going to somehow incorporate this gold ribbon that I have. This gold ribbon is pretty solid, and I thought to myself, hey, this could kind of work like the gold embellishments in the Super Smash Bros. Ultimate dress. So I took a pencil and started hand drawing some swirlies on the ribbon and painstakingly cutting out these little small swirly shapes from the ribbon by hand. Things I do for my art. I carefully placed these pieces on the dress, making sure that I got a pattern that I liked, and once I decided that I liked the pattern I'd set on the dress, I took a piece of tape and carefully laid it on top of the gold pattern I'd set and lifted it up in hopes of duplicating the pattern for the other side of the dress. You can imagine how long and painful this was. To mirror the design, I did that thing that they teach us in elementary school where you rub the back of a piece of paper with lead, like really hard, and then you like trace over a pattern, and then you in theory get like a duplicate or something. Yeah, I did something like that to make a mirror of the pattern. There was probably a better way to do this, but I don't have a circuit cutter, so my only option for doing this kind of thing is to cut it out by hand with tiny scissors. But yeah, this is the best solution I could think of at the time. Along with attempting to mirror the golden design thing that I made for the one side of the dress, I used that same design to try and make a design for the middle of the dress. I'm not explaining this as well as I could, but you're gonna see what I mean in a second. See this? This is exactly what I was talking about. And now that I was happy with my designs, it was time to glue them onto the dress. Very carefully, I took the tape off of the paper and used the tape to basically place the design on the dress. And thankfully, this allows me to move the design if I don't like where I initially placed it, giving me some wiggle room to kind of just wait and see if it works out. Once I was satisfied, I sewed the middle sequin in place, and then I took the tape pieces that held my golden flaky design, and I carefully placed it around the gold sequin. Now that that was going to be its final placement, I very carefully took some glue and I put it on the back of the golden pieces while I carefully peeled them off from the tape. And this is basically how I got the equivalent of a circuit cutter design onto my dress. Using hours of cutting with tiny scissors and a lot of energy of me questioning my life decisions. I put the same golden flaky design on the bustles of the dress, very carefully gluing it to the dress, and I also put pieces of parchment paper between fabric layers because, for the love of God, I did not want to glue the dress to itself. While the gold flaky glimmer designs were drying, I took a look at them and decided they needed a little more stuff. Taking some blue pearls, I put them in the middle of one of the golden swirly whirlies, and it does help add a little something something. From here on out though, I do go back and forth on a lot of different little embellishments. Don't get me wrong, I actually had a lot of fun adding a bunch of little beads and embellishments to the dress. Like in this instance, I added some golden beads to just add some more golden sparkles onto the golden pieces. Adding embellishments to the white lace is what I seem to struggle with the most. At one point, I put a line of sequins along the base of the dress, but then I took it apart because I didn't like it. But I also put a line of sequins along the lace of the bustle, which I again took apart because I didn't like it. But this is eventually what I decided on. Just doing a couple limited pearls, some fancy gems, and some little ribbons. Once I finished the dress, I thought to myself, oh my gosh, I'm almost done with this doll. All I have to do now is give her a face up. But then I saw that I didn't paint the crown, and I didn't paint the shoes either. So yeah, I had to do more than just the face up at that point. Oh, and if you're wondering why I wrapped her in plastic like that just now, it's because I thought that it would help keep the hairstyle in place. Yeah, hairstyling really isn't my thing. To prepare the crown for painting, I put it on a stick with some putty, and then I realized I didn't do anything about the cuffs on the arms. As you may remember, I sculpted a pair of cuffs in ZBrush, but I ended up not using them. So I took a piece of lace that had a similar look to the cuffs of her gloves. I glued it onto her arm, and then I sewed it for an extra measure of security because I didn't trust the glue by itself. I was worried that the seam line was going to look a little lumpy, but it actually looks really cute. I'm actually really glad I did it this way because the original cuff that I sculpted was probably going to look really bulky. To get started on the crown, the first thing I did was paint it in a layer of yellow. And because I was getting kind of impatient at this point, I ended up drying it between layers with a hairdryer. It was going to take a couple of layers of yellow to get it to look like a nice golden base color. The last sweeping layer that I gave this crown was a layer of gold to give it that nice and shiny metallic look. I did set it aside to let it dry, but after it dried, I thought that it looked kind of flat. To remedy this flatness, I mixed some multiple tones of yellow and gold and just used that to add some definition and highlights on different parts of the crown, just so it looked more like actual metal, probably even a little aged, and also because it just looked cartoonishly flat with just a basic layer of paint, you know? Maybe that's just me being overcritical again. Initially, I was going to use some colored resin to fill the gem holes of the crown, but I decided to paint in the gems instead and use clear resin on top of that. I'm actually really glad I did it this way. I think it probably would not have looked as good if I did it the first way I was planning. Yeah, these things come with experience, don't they? Taking the time to add the little extra details was definitely the right move, as I liked the way the crown came out a lot better than the first pass. And I think the colors I did for the gems was well worth it too. You'll see how it looks in the final product. And now for the reason that most people watch doll customizing videos for, we're gonna do the face up. Quick disclaimer! I actually did this face up once before and I didn't like it, so I wiped it away, and I'm not going to show you the footage of it because I just didn't like it. Please forgive me. This second try was better, I promise. After giving the faceplate a couple layers of Mr. Clean, I start by adding some pastels for the lips, the eyes, the cheeks, the nose, and even to block in the shape of the eyebrows, which I don't usually do because I usually don't do that right. The good thing about laying pastels is it sets down a nice foundation for the face. So, I must have been feeling really brave when I did this because I broke out the gouache paints and started painting in the eyelash line. I usually would never do this because I'm usually not that confident in my ability to do a face-up, but it worked out fine this time, and wow, I'm kind of in shock watching this back and realizing I was this brave to just paint on some eyelashes. But yeah, using a thin brush, I painted on some fluffy eyelashes, being very careful to make them nice and sharp. I gotta admit, eyelashes and eyebrows, those are not my strong suit. I get so anxious trying to paint thin hairs on faces. Using some gouache paint, I started painting in the eyebrow to add a more defined eyebrow. And I'm like watching this back in astonishment, just being amazed at how brave I was suddenly being by painting in the eyebrows and the lash line without any pencil guidelines. I've never approached a face-up this brazenly before, but I guess it worked out this time. Using a white watercolor pencil, I gave the face some essential highlights in the eyes, the eyelids, the lips, and the little nose, before setting her outside for another layer of Mr. Clean. After another layer of Mr. Clean, I go back and use some more gouache paint to define the lash line and the eyelashes, just to make sure that they stand out nicely on the face-up. Yeah, I still can't believe I went in with just the brush of the paint and no underlying drawing. I mean, I did with the first attempt of the face-up, but I just didn't like it. So, I guess fortune favors the brave, and I think that was a line from South Park. On the first attempt of this face-up, I struggled a lot with the lips, and I think it's because I was really overthinking how to do them. So this time around, I basically just used pastel and very carefully tried to define the midline of the lips so that it looked like she had natural lips. And while I don't think that they're perfect, I think that they actually look really cute. But I did realize during this face-up that I didn't particularly sculpt the lips properly. Looking at canon female Mario characters, a lot of them have round lips, and I realized the top lip of Miss Peach's here is, it's kind of flat. I might have done that unconsciously because I give a lot of my characters flat lips. I'll be sure to fix it when I make a Daisy doll. Whenever that is. Look at that, she's so pretty! She may not have eyes, but she's so pretty! I thought that the face was the last thing I was gonna do, but nope, I was wrong. Turns out it's the eyes. Well, actually, there's a little more after this too, but I do have a funny story regarding the eyes. So, obviously I printed out the skin tone parts and the white parts in different sessions, but when I printed out the white parts, I remember looking at what I printed and thinking to myself, something is missing. But what is it? It wasn't until later in the project when I was trying to get the shoes to fit on Princess Peach's feet that I realized, oh my god, I forgot to print the eyes! Well, it's not that I forgot to print them, it's that the initial print of them failed. But anyways, I eventually printed them out, and now you see me here painting them. Well, this first layer was pastel. What I ended up doing for the majority of the eyes was painting them with gouache paint and basically hand painting what looked like a regular, I almost said human, regular anime, kawaii eye. Unfortunately, with the camera angle I decided to go with, it's a little difficult to see what I'm doing, and yeah, if you're annoyed by that, so am I. I'm the person painting in the video, but I'm also the editor. Imagine how I feel. To give you a little bit of a quick rundown of what I was doing, I basically made multiple shades of blue, made them look all gradienty and pretty and consistent with the way an artist should be painting a gradient type eye like this. Then I added some white highlights, and then I actually took some pretty little glitters and I cut them into pieces and I put them inside the eye. And too bad you can't see that process very clearly, but here's the final result. You know, putting them on my hand like this, it kind of looks like a really weird hand puppet. Putting him in the face, though, oh my god, look at that! She's so pretty! Okay, so here's the final step this time. I needed to put some resin on the crown and on the eyes, so I took the eyes, put some putty on the back, and then I put those on sticks, and then for some reason I started adding resin to the crown instead. Not entirely sure why I did it like this when I looked like I was going to work on the eyes first, but, you know. I give each gem a little dollop of clear UV resin, and then I put that into the UV oven to just solidify with the UV light for a bit. And then I do that about 3 more times with the rest of the gems. Once I did that to the crown, I moved on to putting UV resin into the eyes, let them bake in the UV oven for a bit, and when I pulled them out, I thought to myself, oh my gosh, I'm actually done, I can put her together now! I was wrong. Putting all the pieces near each other, I realized that I forgot to put the magnet in the head and the crown. I know I said I made a faceplate system without magnets, but this is different, I promise. I put some washi tape on one side of 2 little magnets, and then I put those magnets in the head and on the crown. See, I told you it was different, because this magnet is meant to hold the crown onto the head. Once those magnets were glued in, I set them both aside, and I tried to keep them as separate as I could while they were drying. Because seriously, if they end up connecting while they're drying, it's gonna ruin everything! At this point, all her pieces are technically done, but I actually just wanted to show off these little feet real quick. And the reason why is because when I initially made the feet, they were actually too wide at the toes, so to make them fit into the shoe, I had to shave them down. And now I understand why Barbie's feet are so simple. Another thing is that I know that in most renders her shoes are often a pink color, but I kind of decided I liked them in white, and I thought that they looked nice with the dress. Also, I was getting impatient, leave me alone. Now that all her pieces are finished, it's time for assembly. When putting her together, I made sure to keep the hands off until I put the dress on, since the fingers had a difficult time fitting through the armhole. But once her body was in the dress, I put the hands on, made sure the shoes were on, put the wig on, I put the face before the wig, and then I put the crown on top of the wig, and now Princess Peach is complete. When I was looking at her fully put together though, I thought that she was missing a couple things. Don't get me wrong, I love the result, but I do think she could use a little more things, so I took a little bead and I glued it to her little fingy to make it look like she has a little pretty ring. I also glued some of the same little tiny blue pearls from earlier, and I glued them onto these little sharp ends of a toothpick, yeah, that's what I meant. And then I put those into her ear holes, and now she has some pretty earrings. With those little tiny embellishments, Princess Peach is finally complete. Going into the stall, I knew I wanted to go all out on the clothes, and while I didn't end up making the Showtime-esque costumes I was hoping for, I really liked the way that Princess Peach came out, and this is the first time I successfully made a wig. Unless you count Pomni, but that's not really a wig. That's more like a hat with hair in it. Yeah. I've had a lot of fun posing her and taking pictures, but I've decided throughout this process that I will likely be making joints similar to action figures or mass market dolls for future dolls, mainly for the elbows and the knees. It's not that I think ball joints are bad or anything, it's just that with the way that they pose, sometimes it's not as posable as I would hope, or sometimes the round end of the ball joints will twist out of place. I have learned a lot from making ball jointed dolls and similar toys within the past 2 years, but I believe for the sake of myself and the growth of my potential career, it'd be in my best interest to migrate towards more mass market joints, at the very least for the elbows and the knees, just for better articulation, posability, child safety, just a bunch of different factors I'd like to get a good handle on moving forward. I pretty much say this with every project, but I definitely think I learned a lot making Princess Peach, and I am especially happy with the way her weight is distributed throughout the doll, so she's definitely one of the more posable dolls I've made, as one of the critical errors I used to make a lot was making certain parts of the doll too heavy or too light, which can really interfere with posability, and that was really prevalent in dolls like my Waluigi doll's hands, or my Pomni doll's arms and legs, where the arms themselves were too light, and the hands and the hips and the shoulders were all too heavy. So yeah, it's all a big balancing act. Probably got a Target scene. New deodorant. Generally speaking, I don't treat my videos like tutorials. They are more like learning experiences for myself and entertainment for the audience. And that's kind of funny to say out loud because I initially made my Waluigi doll video as a portfolio project. You know, while editing videos is an absolute pain in the tuchus, I've found that I really enjoy making projects like these. Do I like turning them into videos? To be honest, that's yet to be determined, but I do believe I'm getting faster at video editing. Whether my next video is next week or next year, I really enjoyed making Princess Peach and would like to make a similar Rosalina or Daisy doll sometime in the future. If you'd like to see more from me, please check out my card linked in the description for my Instagram, Twitter, and many other social media sites. Blue Sky and Kara will be added on there too very soon. This is usually the part where I tell you to visit my website and then I spell it out, but my website is going to be under construction for the time being as you're watching this. But I hope to have it up again looking better than ever. I hope you're all doing well, and if no one told you today, the world wouldn't be the same without you. Know that you're valued and make my world a better place every day. So these holidays just passed, but I just wanted to wish you a happy Labor Day, a blessed Rosh Hashanah, a blessed Yom Kippur, a happy Indigenous Peoples Day, and while I do hope to get this video done by All Hallows Eve, along with a special spooky video, I believe this is worth saying for the time being. Happy Halloween.